Okay, so now we're going to look at something that involves layer management. When you're working with members like these steel members, you'll notice that there are two components. You got the solid on the center line, and you'll see that they're on two different layers. Also, you'll notice that when you open up your layer manager, even if you have 0 layers in the drawing when you first start, the moment you open up a moment you invoke any CADWorx command for solid editing and modeling, like the dialog box or anything, what it does is it loads a set of default CADWorx layers in here. These layers are actually controlled in the setup. It says here configuration layers. So these layers are created in every drawing by default the moment you invoke a CADWorx modeling command. It does not happen with single line, but it does happen with CADWorx modeling functions. So the default layer for the solid portion is steel, and it's a color 8. And the solid the standard layer for the center line is seal still, and it's magenta. These things can be changed. They are changed from company to company, and you're able to modify these layers, right? But you don't modify them in the way you traditionally would by maybe selecting an object and going and changing the layer. Say I wanted to change this to like the, I don't know, exist layer. You'll see what happens is that everything gets changed at the same time. I'll put it on a different one, maybe it's easier to see. Okay, we've changed both the solid and we've changed the center line. And that's because this is a group. And as such, it's going to update both objects in the group. In some cases, later on the road when I'm getting over single line, it actually will be important to keep both items on the same layer for when you freeze one of them. Right now, if I freeze the solid layer, the centerline layer is left behind. Or if I freeze the centerline layer, the solid layer is left behind. They can be independently frozen because they're on different layers. And this is really, really, and I cannot stress this enough, really important to remember that they can be turned off and frozen independently, because I've seen this a lot actually, where people will freeze the solid or freeze the center line for whatever reason. And I don't understand why, but they do. They freeze the center line, and then they'll go and forget that the center lines are turned off and go and make modifications to the beam. And then when you go and you bring your center line back, it's off to the side. It's still associated with the solid though, but it's off to the side. Double clicking does not reset the beam. Converting solid does bring it back. That's good to know. That it's good to know that it can do that. However, one of the other dangers of that is having things turned off like this and then not realizing it, and then erasing members, and then you go and turn things back on, and you're like, oh my God, I got all these center lines everywhere that are clashing with other beams. Try not to keep to freeze your solids or your center lines unless you are absolutely aware of what you're doing. And if you are aware of what you're doing, don't leave it like that in case somebody else gets into your model and they don't understand that you've frozen your solids or frozen your center lines. So, okay. So if you're not supposed to be changing your layers by just selecting the objects and changing the layers, how do you change your layers? That is going to be through this button right here, which is called the steel layer change. The command for that is S layer change. It's a long command, so I've given it a command alias. I'd recommend the same unless you want to use the icon. What S layer change does is allow you to change the layer of either the solid or the center line independently. So you have two options, whether you want to select all the components at the same time or whether you want to select which ones you want to modify. So I'm going to say select, so just right click or enter or however, and select the objects you want to modify, enter. That's going to give you two options. First one is, do you want to change the solid layer? And I'm going to say yes. I'm going to put the solid layer on the supports layer. Done. Do you want to change the centerline layer next? I'm going to say no. Most of the time, you're going to want to say no to changing the centerline layer. The companies I've worked at have always had one layer for the center line and maybe multiple layer for the solids. If you have the option, if you want to make multiple center line layers and put your center lines on specific centerline layers. Maybe you have a centerline layer for the beams as well as a solid layer for the beams. It's however you want to do it. One of the reasons you don't want to have them the same color is just for ease of use. When everything is, I'm going to do match properties here by matching the beam to itself. When you have everything matching like this, it can be difficult to understand or quickly view where the center line is at. You know it's this one because it's where it just was, but without knowing that, without working with it ahead of time, you may not know where that center line is at. So I'd say don't do that if you don't have to, but there are times when you will have to when getting into single line steel. So that's that command, S layer change, or the icon there. And you're going to use that to change layers for all of your steel. Sometimes it's just one layer for all of your steel. Some companies have just one layer for all the steel. Other companies might have different layers for different things like beams and columns and handrail, bracing, plates, whatever. You're going to want to use that S layer change to change all the steel. And of course, you can do multiple members at once, like a lot of things. If I want to do that, I'm going to select all of them, say yes for changing the solid layer, and then changing that to the original steel layer, and they'll change all at once. So that is how you update and change the layers.